I want to talk with you today about sustainment, herd immunity, and leadership development. I want to begin by saying that I think that there have been some very notable, well-researched articles about leadership development that point out some of the challenges that we have. McKinsey has published such an article. Bain has written some things. And I think we need to take these criticisms seriously, and I'm going to go through them. I don't want to read them to you. You can read them. But I've kind of listed 8 here. And I would say to you that I think some of these criticisms are very legitimate, and there are some criticisms that I want to address today. I want to talk about what I think we as a discipline can do. For those of you who are here with your HR hat on, I think you will hear some things that may be of relevance to you. You who are here for your own personal development, we're kind of letting you in on some of the secrets of what goes on in this world of leadership development. But needless to say, there are some things that we as a discipline can do better. And so I've listed what some of those are up there on the screen. At the same time, I want to say to you, I think not all the criticisms are just. There is a book that was written recently by a Stanford professor named Jeffrey Pfeffer that really would attribute a number of the world's ills to the leadership development profession. High CEO turnover is our fault, according to Pfeffer. Low employee engagement is our fault, according to Pfeffer. Good leaders should be self-absorbed, narcissistic, deceiving, lie to their people. These are some of the things which Pfeffer would argue are characteristic of the best leaders. As you might guess, those are not attributes that I would subscribe to, nor is there good research to support that. But I do want to talk about what I think some of the solid criticisms are and what we can do to rectify that. The big concerns, it seems to me, are to what degree can we make leadership development eminently practical? To what degree can we bring measurement into the equation? And how do we bring about sustained change? I was a fairly young graduate student many years ago, and I had designed for my doctoral dissertation an experiment where we would do team training with groups of salespeople who were selling insurance, and we would work with them and kind of by welding them into a stronger team. The theory of my dissertation was that this would lead to higher performance. And after kind of designing this and presenting it to my committee, one of my committee members, after the approval was given, kind of sat down with me and he said, "There's just one thing, Jack." He said, what really matters is not what you do in those sessions, but it's really what happens afterward. That was the first big bucket of cold water I had poured on me when it comes to this topic of sustainment. It isn't what we do in the event. It isn't what we do in the training session. It's what happens afterward. And so I want to talk with you about what we as an organization are trying to do to address that issue and enlist your help in helping us to think about and implement solutions to this question of how do we create ongoing sustainment. Our latest attempt is an offering we've called Advancing the Extraordinary Leader. I just want to talk to you a little bit about what it includes, because I think the same thing really would apply to virtually any leadership development program that would be offered by us or by others. There are 2 new bodies of content that we think need to be included in such a reinforcement session. To just simply go back and have people do another 360 and to get a report that shows the gap, the differences, the improvements that they've made, to simply kind of rehash the earlier learning that they had, even to create a new development plan, probably isn't enough to attract their enthusiasm and their participation and involvement in a sustainment activity. So what we have tried to do is to say, what what would make it really worthwhile? What could we add in that offering that would make it so appealing to people and would truly address the important issues facing this question of sustainment? I think there are two bodies of content, and one of them is, how do you build sustainment into your job? How do you use your workplace as the perfect classroom for leadership development? Rather than looking for another experience, another event, how do you kind of say, oh, my job can be the perfect laboratory for me to improve my leadership skills? This idea came from a book written by a couple of consultants from the Forum Corporation, published back in 2009. And I must confess that when it first came out, I didn't hear about it or see it. And it wasn't until a couple of 3 years later that that was brought to my attention, and I said, oh my goodness, these people have really captured the essence of what sustainment needs to be all about. And so the main conclusion of their work was this: we have often seen there being this big barrier between, oh, this is my job, and here is my development process, and never the twain shall meet. And people have often sort of felt that they had to make a choice. Either I continue my personal development, or I perform to a very peak level on my job. And it's a choice between those two. What these two authors of this book kind of proposed was that there needn't be a barrier between those two at all, that indeed they can be kind of meshed into one. And what I loved about the thoughts that came to us after having read this and thought about it was that you can really contemplate maybe at least 8 different activities that you can build into your job that will enable you to continue your own leadership advancement, leadership development. Time will not let me kind of spend a lot of time talking about each one of those, but sufficient to say you can learn new information, you can build new relationships, you can initiate special interest groups. For example, if you were particularly interested in strategic thinking, one of the things you could do would be to invite some of your colleagues who you think maybe would have a similar interest to meet with you and talk about that. You could use your job to better implement new habits of reflection and planning in your work. I think we've kind of learned that simply doing the job doesn't create progress and doesn't always elevate people's performance. It's when people do the job and then take the time to reflect and to kind of ponder and to assess what's happening, that then does bring about progress and development on the job. You can create new mechanisms of feedback for yourself. You can, in your job, find ways by which you can get accurate information from your colleagues. One of the things that clearly can be done for many of you is to think about how you restructure your job, how you maybe can delegate some of the things that you don't enjoy doing or that you're not as good at to others for whom that would be a real benefit and a help, and that would free you up to spend more time on planning and visioning and being the pathfinder for the organization. You can take the lead in kind of adopting new technology and find the latest and greatest applications and software to help you do your job even more effectively. Anyway, there are at least these 8 different approaches. And so one of the things that we do in this Advancing the Extraordinary Leader activity is to help people see how they might apply one or more of those to their own work. The second big important concept, I think, that is included in this program called Advancing the Extraordinary Leader is the way that by which you might involve your manager to a much greater degree. We've known for a long time that the people who do the best, who make the greatest gains, who show the most improvement, are those who find a way to meaningfully engage their manager in their development. But how do you do that? Not all managers instinctively kind of gravitate there, despite the data, which is very clear. And you see up here on the screen a little study that Joe did where we looked at the percent of leaders who feel that they have improved on the vertical axis, and then the level of manager support that they felt on the horizontal axis. And to see the relationship between those two is pretty compelling. Obviously, when people feel that their manager has really supported them, they feel that they have made the greatest amount of change. And so you might just think about your own situation. When you've been through personal development programs, how involved was your manager? And if you were to use the criteria of how much time he spent or she spent with you, if you were to involve the number of times that he or she initiated a conversation about your development, or just the general attitude that they possessed, were they truly interested in your growth and development? One of the questions, of course, that always comes up is, why aren't managers more involved? The common answers that you would probably guess would be, many managers would say, well, it's time. I'm very busy, and this, it's just adding one more thing to a very busy plate. I personally think that's a cop-out. I don't think that's the real reason. I think the real reasons are much more, do they know what to do? How much comfort do they have? They don't always feel it is their responsibility to manage or to help you and the subordinates in their development process. The organization doesn't always reward it. The organization doesn't always kind of give any kudos or kind of any recognition to the managers who are paying attention to their subordinates' development. And then finally, I think it's often they have not been asked. The subordinate has not come to them and really sought their involvement and their support, and hence they have other things and other open beaks kind of wanting their attention, and they kind of just it gets ignored. If I said 70, 20, 10 to people in the HR world, how many of you would know what I'm talking about? Okay, those of you who don't happen to be in the HR world, you might just have kind of noticed that the HR people here know what this means. There's a fascinating story about this. So what it means is it's been kind of shorthand for the fact that there is this belief that in terms of people's development, 70% comes from on-the-job experience. 20% comes from your boss, from other senior people in the organization, other colleagues. And 10% might come from a more formal leadership development experience like many of you have just had the last day or so. Now, there's a fascinating backstory to this statistic. Where this, quote, research came from was a group of 30 participants in a seminar that was conducted by the Center for Creative Leadership. And the person who was facilitating this group just happened to ask these participants, as you reflect on your own life, where did your current development come from? How much of it came from your on-the-job experience? How much came from your coaching from your boss? And how much of it came from the formal classes that you've taken? And 70-20-10 was the distillation of 30 participants who scratched down on a piece of paper their self-perceptions about where their development came from. Now, having said that, I believe it's directionally correct, but as you can tell, I'm not really totally confident of the numbers, but let's say for a moment that it's directionally correct, and I think it is. So if that's indeed directionally correct, the concept is correct, but the message is a person's job is a great place to practice. It's a great place to put into practice many of the things that they're thinking about and wanting to develop as their leadership skills. And it's a great place to apply Willie Sutton's wisdom. Now, for those of you from out of the United States, you probably don't know who Willie Sutton is, do you? How many don't know who Willie Sutton is? How many don't know what? Well, yeah. Okay, thank you. So Willie Sutton was a very well-known bank robber. He was a thief, and he made a practice of going into banks and stealing their money. And he had a long, very notable career of robbing banks. And someone once said to Willie Sutton, "Why do you rob banks?" And his answer was, "Because that's where the money is." And so when I jokingly say, let's think about applying Willie Sutton's wisdom, if indeed 70% or some number, some high number is available to us by using our job as a place to grow and develop and to apply leadership principles, we should pay attention to it. And we should, because that's where the money is. That's where the big payoff potentially can be. Similarly, then, how do you find ways to take better advantage of your boss and his or her willingness to be your coach and to help you in your development? One of our colleagues in this world of leadership development is Jim Clemmer. And Jim's probably here in the audience somewhere. Yeah, he's over. I can see Jim. And when Jim first saw the Extraordinary Leader Program, he made what I thought was a very insightful comment. He said, "This isn't just a one-day leadership development program. This is a very systematic, it's a systemic kind of approach to developing people." And I appreciated that insight, because that's indeed what needs to occur. And so if we can somehow create discussion points with managers, coaching frameworks for managers and subordinates, sustainment activities or devices that a team can implement within itself, if we can find ways to refresh people's recollection and understanding of the content, if we can give them an opportunity to receive another 360-degree feedback by which they can now compare, where was I? Where am I now? Where have I made progress? Where have I stayed the same? Where have I kind of maybe gone downhill a little bit? If you can combine all these things into a relatively short, impactful workshop, can we truly make progress in this issue of creating sustainment for the development activity? Can you then recommend selectively to various individuals workshops in which they could participate that would help them propel their development in areas that they realize are big opportunities for them? So this notion of creating a leadership development system is one that I would invite you to kind of think about, and we would welcome your ideas about what can you do in your organizations, where have you seen success, what have you seen that's worked. We would like to be the center hub of exchanging good ideas that would truly further this cause of sustainment. Some organizations have gone on to take the 16 differentiating competencies and they have embedded them in their other HR systems. Systems that would involve selection, promotion, performance reviews, to the degree that you can build a common, consistent framework being used for measurement and evaluation, clearly you help cause sustainment. We've also found that when organizations elect to kind of combine the results from a number of individuals and share that with a leadership team or with a group of managers in a division, the division or this group of managers can now see where are our strengths? What can we collectively learn from each other? What do we need to work on, and what should we really celebrate in terms of our signature strengths? We believe that creating executive summaries can be very, very powerful, very, very useful as groups kind of stand back and reflect upon their own successes. And then, of course, to the degree that we can help them see how those improvements in leadership behavior play out in business outcomes. Better customer retention, higher levels of employee engagement, increased productivity, all of those things which every organization aspires to constantly be improving upon. So what pleases me very much today is to say to you that within a month, we will have three alternative delivery mechanisms available for this kind of a sustainment tool. There will be an instructor-led session, and for you who have unique competency models that have been created specifically for your organization, we can tailor this experience to you and your company. There will be a self-initiated kind of process by which people can go through the how do you involve your manager, how do you build development into your work. And they can also then pair up with a coach who will kind of work with them to kind of put together a new development plan, and who will also then serve to hold them accountable to the implementation of that through the coming weeks and months. And finally, we are developing and have been working with a client who wanted a totally self-instructional version of this advancing the extraordinary leader process, done completely on the individual's own time, at their own pace, with engaging tools and techniques, but would require no involvement from a facilitator or an instructor. Applying that same logic, we have taken a course like our Extraordinary Coach program and developed what we've called skill accelerators. They take the fuel model, which is the kind of the backbone, the skeleton of that coaching program, and help participants who have been through the coaching process to say, how do I apply those same concepts and principles to improving performance appraisals, to helping people think about implementing change inside their company, to think about how they can improve their feedback and coaching processes on a regular routine basis, to how they can improve the development of personal development plans for their subordinates, to how they can elevate the levels of employee engagement and have employees feel more valued and appreciated. So there's a variety of these skill accelerators that are available for organizations who are using that kind of a coaching program. The last thing I want to talk with you about is a concept that I heard kind of for the first time about a year ago, and it's referred to as the concept of herd immunity. Where I first was introduced to that notion was I was listening to a newscast one night where a person had come on who was strongly advocating that all of the parents in the local community make sure that their children were being inoculated against contagious diseases, and specifically in this case it was measles. there were a few people who were kind of holding out, who had some personal beliefs about the danger and the dangers of inoculations. Some who believed that this was the cause of autism, for which there's no scientific evidence at all. But as this person was describing to parents how important this was, they used this term herd immunity. And I really had not ever thought about that particularly, but as I did contemplate it, I thought, that's interesting because I think it has some relevance to what we do. The idea here basically was, parent, you may think it's only your child that's involved or that we're concerned about. And yes, we are concerned about your child and his or her well-being and health. But we're also concerned about if you don't inoculate your child, you aren't only endangering her or him, you're endangering the whole community. Because by your not being involved and participating, you increase the likelihood that this disease can find its way into our community and spread to others. And so it's only when we collectively get together and really have our children inoculated that we truly develop this community of health. The same thing applies to adults and getting flu shots. Only, 60 or 70% of adults go get the flu shot. It's not very expensive, but if all of us who were adults at the right time of year got flu shots, the incidence of flu would drop down dramatically. So what does that have to do with leadership development? Here's what I think it has to do with. What are we trying to do? We're trying to create healthy teams of leaders who provide direction and guidance and inspiration to their organizations. If we truly believe the mantra that we've heard executives for years say, every employee deserves to come to work and work for a good leader. If we really believe that, then we can only achieve that when we develop the herd. And what triggered this particularly in my mind was Joe and I were talking one day about his experience working with some large organizations for the last 30 years. And I reflected on my experience working with some organizations. And we could both think of several instances where the organization believed that they really had a very effective leadership development activity. Because every year in the summertime, they would have a session for 20 or 30 of their leaders to come together and go through a development process. But the organization had 3,000 leaders, and they were treating 30. And the notion that wasn't going to really make a very big dent in the herd just didn't seem to be part of their thought process. I thought back to a comment that Peter Drucker had made, and I'm going to show you this in a minute. Maybe I'll show it to you right now. Peter Drucker once made the comment, if you're wanting to change the organization, you have to reach out and at least impact a third of all of the managers. And if you really want to impact the organization, you need to get to 2/3 of all the managers. I thought back to two different scenarios that I've seen play out in organizations. I worked a few years ago with a company that really prided itself on having this wonderful catalog of leadership development programs from which people could go in and choose one of probably 100 or so different courses that were available to them. It was like a university catalog. The problem was that only 10 or 15 people attended each course on average. So consider for a moment two different scenarios. Consider an organization that has 20 different leadership development offerings, to which maybe on average 25 people attend. And if you multiply it out and you calculate the number of training days, you can quickly make that calculation. And now compare a second organization that says, you know, we think that there is one very basic building block program that every manager in our organization should participate in, and we'll try to get that to happen within a relatively, short period of time. And so 500 managers attend this process. And the question, obviously, then to you would be, which one of these will have the greater impact on the company? How many would vote for A? Not many hands. How many would vote for B? And there's lots of us that vote for B. So to what degree can we help more and more organizations understand that it's when you practice this scenario of choose what you believe to be a powerful, well-researched, content-rich, behavior-changing event and expose as many people as you can, because it is only by that method will you really truly have an impact on the herd. The last thought I want to leave with you is this. That last criticism that was on my original list was a criticism that said, we in leadership development have focused a great deal of our attention on the interpersonal skills, communication skills, collaboration, teamwork, being inspiring, being motivating. We've focused very much on that realm. Our research would indicate that there's a second kind of big category or big bucket that's also pretty important, and that is the whole issue of execution. How do you go about getting those things to happen? And by execution, I guess I'm talking about things like people having a truly conscientious kind of point of view, willing to put in hard work, willing to be persistent, being resilient, gritty, people who are willing to kind of be bold, take action, kind of make things occur, set stretch goals. They're fairly aggressive about what they want to accomplish. People who do it with speed, who are kind of brisk, and they pick up the pace, and they're concerned about the productivity of the organization. And finally, by execution, I'm talking about those who are willing to kind of be analytical and use data to make decisions and to improve thereby the implementation. Now, this is obviously a kind of a generalization, but we've been very focused on the interpersonal side, appropriately so, I think, but we haven't paid as much attention to the execution side. And I'm going to just stand here today and sort of predict that we are going to find more and more interest in, and we'll want to pay more and more attention to creating a balance between these two. I am by no means advocating that we run from this side of the boat to that side of the boat. But I do believe that there needs to be more balance, and that we need to find ways to help people who are good interpersonally to understand what they can do to become better at the execution side. Just as we have for the last decade or so taken those people who were really good at executing and helping them to move over and become better at the interpersonal side. So that's my prediction. That's my belief. And I would conclude by saying, why has this sustainment topic been so hard? Why has it been around for so long, And why have we not seemingly made a lot more progress in making it happen? And I would submit to you, maybe it's because a lot of us are kind of more comfortable with, we're hooked on the interpersonal side. We find the emotion in it to be more engaging, and putting together a rollout implementation process that covers the entire organization has not been quite as much fun. With that, I am just going to leave you with those thoughts. And I realize that this is a change. And Mark Twain, the very prominent writer and philosopher and humorist, said, "Habit is habit, and not to be flung out the window by any man, but coaxed downstairs a step at a time." Will you help us in coaxing downstairs this concern and zeal for better implementation? Thank you.